The funeral reception felt hollow, but Ryan Mitchell stood alone by the window of his childhood home, watching rain streak down the glass while mourners whispered about his mother, Eleanor Mitchell, who had died 3 days ago. A woman everyone knew as a modest librarian, but whose locked office upstairs contained secrets worth $90 billion in real estate assets, spanning 47 countries. His wife of 6 years, Victoria, hadn't shed a single tear during the service, but Ryan noticed how her hand kept finding its way to his best friend Derek's arm, their fingers intertwining when they thought no one was watching. The lawyer, Mr. Pemberton, had requested Ryan stay after everyone left for urgent matters regarding your mother's estate, but Victoria announced she was filing for divorce that very afternoon, moving out to marry Derek within the month, completely unaware that the modest 2-bedroom house she was so eager to abandon sat on property documents that would make Ryan the controller of a hidden empire that included the very building where she worked, the luxury complex where Derek lived, and 372 other prime properties that powerful people would kill to possess. When Derek actually laughed, at Ryan during the reading of what he assumed was a worthless will, calling him a pathetic mama's boy who inherited nothing but dust and old books, Victoria joined in, but neither of them saw Mr. Pemberton's face go pale as he opened the sealed envelope marked "For my son's eyes only." What would Derek's laughter sound like when he discovered his penthouse lease was owned by the man whose life he'd destroyed? What would Victoria feel when she realized the promotion she'd been promised required approval from a board her ex-husband now controlled? And what would both of them do when Ryan decided whether to show mercy or unleash the full weight of an inheritance they'd mocked him for receiving? Ryan Mitchell had always believed his mother lived a small life, but the truth waiting in Mr. Pemberton's briefcase would shatter that illusion, like glass hitting concrete. The funeral had ended an hour ago, but the house still smelled of lilies and regret. Eleanor Mitchell's body had been laid to rest beside Ryan's father, Thomas, who died when Ryan was 7, a loss that had shaped every moment of the 33 years that followed. Ryan stood in the living room of the modest Cape Cod house in suburban Massachusetts, watching the last mourners filter out into the gray October afternoon. His mother had worked as a librarian at Westfield Public Library for 42 years, but the turnout had been surprisingly small for someone who touched so many lives through books and quiet kindness. Victoria stood across the room, her black dress elegant but impersonal, checking her phone every few minutes with barely concealed impatience. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a severe bun, but her makeup was flawless, more appropriate for a business meeting than a funeral. They'd been married for 6 years, but in the past 18 months, something fundamental had shifted. She worked late constantly, her tech company position consuming her nights and weekends, but Ryan had tried to be understanding, supportive, the kind of husband who didn't complain when dinner went cold or when she came home smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his. Derek Morrison stood beside Victoria, his hand resting on the small of her back in a gesture that seemed far too familiar, too proprietary. Derek had been Ryan's best friend since college, Boston University class of 2014, where they'd bonded over late-night philosophy discussions and dreams of changing the world. Derek had gone into finance while Ryan had followed his mother's footsteps into library science, a choice Derek had mocked gently but consistently for over a decade. Derek wore his success like armor, the Rolex that caught the light, the custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than Ryan's monthly salary, the confident smirk that suggested he'd won at life, while Ryan had settled for participation. Ryan. Mr. Pemberton's voice cut through his thoughts. The elderly lawyer stood in the doorway to the kitchen, his silver hair immaculate, His navy suit pressed to sharp lines, but his face carried an expression Ryan couldn't quite read, something between sympathy and anticipation. "We need to speak privately. It's about your mother's estate." Victoria's head snapped up from her phone, but her interest seemed clinical rather than emotional. "I should be there for this," she said, moving toward Ryan for the first time that day. "We're still married. Community property applies to inheritances in Massachusetts." "Actually," Mr. Pemberton said carefully, "it doesn't." And Mrs. Mitchell was quite specific about privacy. Ryan only. Derek laughed, a sound that had once been familiar and warm but now struck Ryan as sharp, cruel. "Don't worry, Pemberton, there's probably nothing to inherit anyway. Eleanor was a librarian, for God's sake. What did she leave him? A collection of overdue book finds." Several remaining mourners turned at the comment's volume and callousness, but Derek seemed oblivious to their disapproving stares. Victoria touched Derek's arm, but her gesture read as fond exasperation rather than reproach. The intimacy of that touch, the way her fingers lingered, the way he leaned into her hand, sent a cold spike through Ryan's chest. "Derek," Ryan said quietly, "that's my mother you're talking about. She died 3 days ago." "And I'm sorry for your loss, buddy, truly." Derek's tone suggested he was anything but sorry. "I'm just being realistic. Your mom was a lovely woman, but she lived paycheck to paycheck. You've been covering her medical bills for the last 2 years. There's probably more debt than assets." The observation was accurate, but its delivery was deliberately cruel. Eleanor's cancer treatment had been aggressive and expensive, and Ryan had liquidated his modest savings to cover what insurance wouldn't. He'd taken a second job teaching night classes at the community college, editing academic papers on weekends, anything to ensure his mother had the care she needed. Victoria had complained about the financial strain constantly, suggesting more than once that they should consider alternatives or be realistic about quality of life versus cost, phrases that had made Ryan question who he'd actually married. "If you'll follow me, Ryan," Mr. Pemberton said, gesturing toward Eleanor's home office, a room Ryan had rarely entered. His mother had always been private about her workspace, keeping the door locked, claiming she needed a place for library projects and personal paperwork. Ryan had never questioned it, but now that seemed naive. "I'm coming," Victoria announced, stepping forward with Derek at her side. Mr. Pemberton's expression hardened, subtle but unmistakable. "Mrs. Mitchell left explicit instructions. Ryan alone, if you'll excuse us." He opened the office door, and Ryan followed him inside, but not before seeing Victoria's face flush with anger and Derek's smirk deepen with what looked like satisfaction. The door closed with a decisive click, and Mr. Pemberton turned the lock. The office was exactly as Ryan remembered. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, an antique oak desk positioned before a window overlooking the backyard, filing cabinets that looked like they'd survived several decades. But Mr. Pemberton walked past all of it to a section of bookshelf Ryan had always assumed was fixed. The lawyer pressed something Ryan couldn't see, and the entire section swung inward like a door, revealing a climate-controlled room Ryan had never known existed. "Your mother," Mr. Pemberton said softly, "was not who you thought she was." The hidden room was small but sophisticated, but its contents made Ryan's world tilt sideways. Multiple monitors lined one wall, all dark now, but their presence suggested recent use. Filing cabinets with biometric locks stood against another wall. A safe, large and serious, occupied the corner. But what drew Ryan's attention was the wall of photographs. Eleanor Mitchell standing beside presidents, tech moguls, foreign dignitaries, real estate developers whose names everyone recognized. His mother, always dressed impeccably in these photos, but never in the modest cardigan and slacks combinations Ryan associated with her library work. "Sit down, Ryan," Mr. Pemberton said gently, gesturing to one of two leather chairs positioned before the desk. "This will take some time." Ryan sat, but his legs felt disconnected from his body, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "I don't understand. Who are these people? Why is my mother—" "Your mother was Eleanor Mitchell. Publicly but professionally she was known as E.R. Cross." Mr. Pemberton opened his briefcase and withdrew a tablet, his fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Ryan shook his head, but something nagged at the edge of his memory, a name he'd heard in business news maybe, or passing conversation. "E.R. Cross Holdings," Mr. Pemberton continued, "is one of the most successful private real estate investment companies in the world. Your mother founded it 41 years ago with money she inherited from her father, your grandfather, Robert Cross, whom you never met because he died before you were born. She built it into an empire through strategic investments, impeccable timing, and an almost supernatural ability to identify properties that would appreciate exponentially." The tablet screen showed a corporate structure chart so complex it looked like neural pathways, but at the center, in clear letters, Eleanor Ruth Cross Mitchell, founder and sole owner. "That's impossible," Ryan whispered. "My mother worked at the library. I saw her there almost every day until she got sick. She drove a 15-year-old Honda. She clipped coupons. She maintained appearances deliberately," Mr. Pemberton interrupted gently. "After your father died, she made a choice. She could raise you in the world of extreme wealth with all its dangers and corruptions, or she could give you a normal childhood, teach you values that mattered, ensure you became a good man rather than a spoiled heir. She chose the latter." Ryan's hands were shaking, but he couldn't stop them. "The library job was real, though. I visited her there. Her co-workers knew her. The job was real, yes, but it was also cover. The Westfield Library received anonymous donations totaling $47 million over the past 40 years, all from your mother, though the funds were routed through various foundations. She genuinely loved books and wanted to give back to her community, but she also needed a plausible reason to live modestly while managing a global empire." "How?" Ryan's voice cracked. "How did she manage all this while working full-time and raising me?" Mr. Pemberton smiled sadly. "Your mother slept very little. Those nights she told you she was doing library paperwork in her office. She was negotiating with developers in Singapore, closing deals in Dubai, managing properties across 6 continents. She hired the best people, paid them extraordinarily well, and demanded absolute discretion. Only 7 people in the world knew E.R. Cross and Eleanor Mitchell were the same person, and 4 of them are now dead. I'm one of the 3 remaining." The tablet screen changed, showing property after property. Luxury high-rises in Manhattan, office complexes in Los Angeles, shopping centers in Tokyo, apartment buildings in London, resorts in the Maldives. The list scrolled and scrolled, hundreds of properties, each one marked with acquisition date, current value, and appreciation percentage. The numbers were staggering, but they felt abstract, unreal. "The total current valuation," Mr. Pemberton said quietly, "is $90,300 million, and as of your mother's death, you are the sole beneficiary." The room tilted, but Ryan gripped the armrests of his chair, forcing himself to breathe. 90 billion. 300 million, yes, but who's counting? Mr. Pemberton's attempt at levity fell flat in the charged atmosphere. Your mother's will is ironclad. The entire estate transfers to you, along with controlling interest in E.R. Cross Holdings. The management team she built will continue operations, but all major decisions require your approval. You are now, quite literally, one of the wealthiest individuals on the planet. Ryan stood abruptly, needing to move, needing to think. He walked to the wall of photographs, studying his mother's face in each one. She looked powerful in these images, but also tired, carrying a weight he'd never recognized because she'd hidden it so carefully. Why didn't she tell me? Why keep this secret until she died? She left you a letter. Mr. Pemberton produced an envelope, cream-colored and heavy, sealed with red wax embossed with the initials ERC. She wanted you to read it before we discussed specifics. Ryan took the envelope with trembling hands, but he couldn't open it yet. Does anyone else know? Victoria, Derek, anyone at the funeral? No one. Your mother was extraordinarily careful about maintaining separation between her public and private lives. The funeral arrangements, the death certificate, everything listed her as a librarian who died of cancer with minimal assets. The will reading I've scheduled for tomorrow morning at my office was described to your wife as a formality regarding the house and personal effects. She has no idea what's actually in the estate. The mention of Victoria sent Ryan's thoughts spinning in a new direction, but Mr. Pemberton wasn't finished. There's something else you need to know, something your mother discovered shortly before she died. The lawyer's expression darkened, and Ryan felt his stomach drop even before the words came. Your wife, Victoria, and your friend, Derek Morrison. They've been having an affair for 18 months. Your mother hired a private investigator after noticing suspicious behavior at a charity event 8 months ago. The investigator's report is in the safe. He paused. I'm sorry, Ryan. Your mother wanted to tell you herself, but the cancer progressed too quickly. The words should have shocked Ryan, but instead they settled over him like confirmation of something he'd known but refused to admit. The late nights, the emotional distance, the way Victoria flinched when he touched her, the way Derek's visits had become more frequent, and Victoria's interest in their marriage had become non-existent. All of it suddenly made horrible sense. There's more, Mr. Pemberton continued, his voice careful. Victoria has been planning to file for divorce. She's already consulted an attorney, Derek's firm, actually, which is how your mother's investigator discovered the connection. They're waiting until after the funeral, out of what they consider respect, but Victoria intends to file papers within the week. She believes she's entitled to half of everything you inherit. Ryan laughed, but the sound was bitter and foreign to his own ears. She thinks there's nothing to inherit. Derek just said, exactly, Mr. Pemberton agreed. They're operating under the assumption that you're inheriting a modest house, maybe a small life insurance policy, possibly some debt. Victoria's attorney advised her that even community property claims on inheritances are weak in Massachusetts, so she's not expecting much. She's filing for divorce because she wants to marry Derek. He's apparently been offered a promotion to managing partner at his firm, contingent on certain image considerations, and having a wife from the tech sector would benefit his position. The clinical nature of their betrayal was somehow worse than the betrayal itself. They weren't leaving Ryan because of passion or overwhelming love, but because he no longer served their ambitions. He was dead weight, a liability, a reminder of lives they'd outgrown. Derek lives in Crown Tower, doesn't he? Ryan heard himself ask, his voice distant. The luxury building downtown? Mr. Pemberton consulted his tablet. Yes, Unit 4207. Why? My mother owns that building, doesn't she? The lawyer's expression shifted to something that might have been satisfaction. She does. Acquired it in 2018 through a subsidiary. It's valued at $670 million currently. And Victoria works at Nexus Tech Solutions. Correct, whose headquarters building, interestingly enough, is owned by ER Cross Holdings through the Redwood Commercial Properties subsidiary. Your mother acquired it in 2021 for $820 million. Ryan turned from the photographs to face Mr. Pemberton directly. They have no idea. None whatsoever, and how you choose to handle that information is entirely your decision. The lawyer stood, straightening his suit jacket. I need to return to the office to prepare documents for tomorrow's formal reading. I'll be back at 9 a.m. with the full management team. They're eager to meet you. Your mother spoke of you constantly, and they're excited to have her son take the helm. He paused at the door. Read her letter tonight, Ryan. She wanted you to understand why she did things the way she did. After Mr. Pemberton left, Ryan stood alone in his mother's secret office, holding the sealed letter, but unable to open it yet. Through the hidden door, he could hear voices in the house, Victoria's sharp tones, Derek's laughter, people still lingering from the funeral. They were discussing going out to dinner somewhere expensive to cheer Ryan up, as if his presence was an obligation they'd reluctantly accept. Ryan looked at the envelope in his hands, then at the wall of photographs showing his mother's double life. She'd sacrificed comfort and recognition to give him something more valuable. Authenticity, humility, genuine relationships built on character rather than wealth. But those genuine relationships had rotted from within, corrupted by people who saw him as a meal ticket and then as a burden when the ticket seemed worthless. He broke the wax seal and began to read. My dearest Ryan, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you're probably feeling betrayed by my secrets. I understand that anger and I accept it, but I hope you'll let me explain. When your father died, I had a choice to make. I was 32 years old, recently widowed, with a 5-year-old son and a fortune I'd built through real estate investments. Money I'd inherited from my own father and multiplied through relentless work and calculated risks. I could have raised you in that world of wealth, given you everything money could buy, but I'd seen what extreme privilege did to children. I'd watched heirs become hollow, their empathy eroded by insulation from consequences, their relationships transactional, their accomplishments empty because nothing was ever earned. I wanted better for you, but I also wanted you safe. Extreme wealth attracts extreme danger, kidnapping, extortion, people who view a child as a ransom opportunity rather than a person. So I created 2 lives, Eleanor Mitchell, modest librarian and widow, who raised you with library books and home-cooked meals and thrift store clothes, and E.R. Cross, commercial real estate investor who built an empire in the shadows while you slept. The exhaustion nearly killed me more than once. Managing global properties while maintaining perfect cover as a small-town librarian required constant vigilance. But every time I wanted to quit, I'd watch you interact with other children, sharing toys without thought, defending the bullied, valuing people for who they were rather than what they had. And I knew the sacrifice was worth it. You grew into exactly the man I'd hoped. Kind, thoughtful, hard-working, principled. You chose library science not because it paid well, but because you genuinely love helping people discover knowledge. That pride I felt watching you graduate, take your first job, marry Victoria, that was worth more than any amount of money could buy. But here's where I must be honest about something painful, something I discovered too late to address before cancer took my voice and strength. Victoria and Derek have been betraying you, but you probably know that by now if Mr. Pemberton has done his job. I'm sorry, son. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from this particular pain, and I'm sorry my investigation confirmed what a mother never wants to believe about her child's chosen partner. Victoria never loved you the way you deserved, but I think on some level you knew that. She loved your steadiness, your decency, the way you made her feel morally superior to her cutthroat colleagues. But when her career accelerated and your income stayed modest, she began viewing you as a limitation rather than a partner. Derek offered her something you couldn't. Social climbing, financial aggression, the ruthless ambition she'd always admired but felt guilty admiring in herself. Together, they represent everything I raised you not to become, but also everything our culture rewards. I won't tell you how to respond to their betrayal. That's your choice, your journey, but I will tell you this. True power isn't about revenge or domination. True power is about choosing your response to those who wrong you, about deciding what kind of person you'll be when you have every resource to be cruel, but every reason to be wise. The $90 billion I'm leaving you isn't just money. It's responsibility, legacy, opportunity. You can use it to destroy those who hurt you, or you can use it to build something meaningful. You can hide behind it like armor, or you can wield it like a tool for good. You can become the kind of person wealth usually creates, entitled, isolated, paranoid, or you can remain the kind of person you've always been while expanding your capacity to help others. I vote for the latter, but again, it's your choice. The management team I've built is excellent. Trust them, but verify everything. The properties themselves are diverse enough to weather most economic storms, but real estate requires constant attention and strategic vision. Mr. Pemberton will guide you through the legal complexities, and he has my complete trust, which I give to very few people. About Victoria and Derek, they will discover the truth eventually. How they discover it, when they discover it, and what you do with that moment of revelation, that's entirely your decision. But remember that revenge, however satisfying initially, often leaves the avenger emptier than before. Justice is different from revenge. Justice acknowledges wrongs and imposes consequences, but it does so from principle rather than spite. Whatever you choose it deliberately, not reactively. I'm proud of you, Ryan. I'm proud of the man you became despite, or perhaps because of, the limitations I imposed. I'm proud of your kindness in a cruel world, your integrity in a culture that mocks it, your genuine care for others. When transactional relationships are the norm, those qualities make you rare, valuable, and yes, powerful, in ways that transcend wealth. Use this inheritance wisely. Help people who can't help themselves. Build things that matter. Find love with someone who sees your worth beyond bank balances. And when you think of me, don't think of the secrets I kept, but of the love that motivated every choice I made, right or wrong. I loved you more than real estate empires or financial success or anything else this world offers. But death comes for us all, and the only immortality we achieve is through the people we love and the values we instill in them. You are my immortality, Ryan. Make me proud by being happy, purposeful, and true to yourself. All my love forever and always. Mom. Ryan read the letter 3 times, but tears blurred the words by the second reading. He sat in his mother's chair, his chair now, and felt the weight of $90 billion settle on his shoulders like responsibility incarnate. His mother had given him 2 gifts, extraordinary wealth and ordinary character. The question was whether he could hold both without letting one corrupt the other. Outside the office door, he heard Victoria's voice rise in irritation. He's been in there for over an hour. How long does it take to go through a dead woman's desk? We have dinner reservations. Derek's response was lower, but Ryan caught the words, "Let him grieve," delivered with performative sympathy that felt calculated for the remaining guests' benefit. Ryan stood, tucked his mother's letter into his jacket pocket, and opened the door to face his betrayers, but not yet reveal what he knew. Victoria looked up as Ryan emerged from the office, her expression mixing impatience with what she probably thought passed for concern. Finally, is everything okay? Did the lawyer just want to go through her papers? Ryan studied his wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, with new eyes, seeing details he'd overlooked before. The expensive watch that was definitely not a gift from him. The designer bag that cost more than his monthly salary. the subtle highlights in her hair that required maintenance at a salon he couldn't afford. Derek had been subsidizing her lifestyle for months, maybe longer, but Ryan had been too trusting or too blind to notice. "Everything's fine," Ryan said quietly. "Just some paperwork about the house, insurance policies, that kind of thing. Nothing urgent." Derek draped his arm around Victoria's shoulders in a gesture that made Ryan's jaw tighten, but he forced himself to remain calm. "See, babe, I told you it would be routine. Eleanor was organized from what you've said, Ryan. She probably had everything labeled and filed." "She did," Ryan agreed, thinking about the hidden room, the secret empire, the double life his mother had maintained, with meticulous precision. She was very organized. The remaining funeral guests had filtered out during his time in the office, but the caterers were packing up and the house felt cavernous, empty. Victoria checked her watch, the expensive one, and sighed with theatrical impatience. "Derek made reservations at Luciano's for 7. We thought you might want to get out of the house, take your mind off things." Luciano's was the new Italian restaurant downtown, notoriously expensive with a months-long waiting list. Ryan couldn't afford it on his salary, but apparently Derek could. And apparently Victoria was comfortable letting Derek treat them to dinner on the day of Ryan's mother's funeral. The presumption was breathtaking, but Ryan found himself curious about how far they'd push it. "That's thoughtful," Ryan said, meaning the opposite. "But I'm not really hungry. You two go ahead." Victoria's relief was palpable, barely concealed behind a mask of concern. "Are you sure? We don't want you to be alone tonight." "I'm sure. I need to go through Mom's things, start thinking about arrangements for the house." Ryan gestured vaguely at the living room, the furniture that held memories but no monetary value in their eyes. "It'll take time." "Well, if you need help sorting anything," Derek offered with false generosity, "I can come by this weekend. Might be good to have a friend around." A friend. The word tasted like poison, but Ryan smiled. Thanks, Derek, I'll let you know." They left together, Victoria's hand finding Derek's as soon as they thought they were out of Ryan's sightline. Through the window, Ryan watched them walk to Derek's BMW, the latest model, sleek and expensive, and drive away without looking back. The house fell silent except for the caterers finishing cleanup in the kitchen. Ryan returned to his mother's office, but this time he opened the safe using the combination Mr. Pemberton had provided. Inside, he found the private investigator's report, and reading it was like watching his marriage dissolve in clinical detail. Photographs of Victoria and Derek at hotels, credit card statements showing Derek paying for Victoria's purchases, text messages retrieved through means Ryan didn't want to examine too closely, messages discussing Ryan with contempt and mockery, Victoria calling him boring and stuck in the past, Derek referring to him as dead weight and your charity case husband, plans to divorce Ryan after the funeral, to wait until the inheritance situation was resolved so Victoria could claim community property rights if there was anything valuable, then proceed with ending the marriage and beginning their real life together. But what struck Ryan most wasn't the affair itself, painful as that was, but the casual cruelty in their private communications. They didn't just not love him, they actively disdained him. His kindness was weakness. His dedication to library work was lack of ambition. His care for his dying mother was emotional immaturity. Everything he'd thought were strengths, they'd reframed as failures. Ryan closed the report and returned it to the safe, then spent the evening reading through property portfolios on his mother's computer system. Mr. Pemberton had left him passwords and access codes, and as Ryan navigated through spreadsheets and asset listings, the scope of his inheritance became increasingly real. Crown Tower, where Derek lived in smug luxury, generated $47 million in annual revenue from residential and commercial leases. The building had a waiting list for units, and Derek's penthouse cost $12,000 monthly, a figure that made Ryan wince even knowing Derek could afford it through his partner track position at Morrison & Hale, LLP. Nexus Tech Solutions headquarters, where Victoria worked as a senior product manager, was a newer acquisition, but it anchored a downtown development that included 3 additional office buildings, a hotel, and a retail complex. The entire development was valued at $2.3 billion, and ER Cross Holdings owned it all through a web of subsidiary companies that obscured the ultimate ownership. But beyond Derek and Victoria's immediate world, the empire extended globally. Hotels in Paris, office complexes in Dubai, shopping centers in Toronto, apartment buildings in Sydney, resort properties in Bali, each one managed by local teams, each one generating revenue, each one appreciating in value. His mother had built something extraordinary, but she'd done it while clipping coupons and driving a Honda and working at the library because she'd valued her son's character development over personal comfort. Ryan thought about revenge. How easy it would be to evict Derek, to fire Victoria, to destroy them financially and socially with a few strategic moves. The temptation was real, visceral, but his mother's letter echoed in his mind. True power is about choosing your response to those who wrong you. He wouldn't act immediately, Ryan decided. He'd wait for Victoria to file divorce papers. He'd wait for them to make their move, secure in their assumption that he was exactly what they'd decided he was, a nice guy who'd inherited nothing but a modest house and some debt. He'd let them underestimate him one last time, but not because he was weak or afraid, because timing mattered and because the kind of person he chose to be in this moment would define the kind of person he'd become, with $90 billion at his disposal. Ryan slept in his childhood bedroom that night, but dreams of his mother mixed with images of Victoria and Derek laughing at Luciano's, toasting their future with expensive wine. Ryan's inheritance had unknowingly funded through the building lease where the restaurant operated. Tomorrow, Mr. Pemberton would return with the management team. Tomorrow, Ryan would officially become one of the wealthiest people on earth. But tonight, he was still just a son, mourning his mother and a husband facing the end of his marriage. And somehow that felt important, to sit with the pain, to feel it fully, before power and money transformed everything into something else entirely. Mr. Pemberton arrived at precisely 9 a.m. with 5 other people, but the transformation in the lawyer's demeanor was striking. Yesterday, he'd been respectfully professional. Today, he radiated an authority that suggested he was accustomed to managing billions and the people who owned them. "Ryan," he said warmly, entering the house with confidence that came from years of trusted service, "may I introduce you to your mother's executive team?" The introductions were surreal, but each person treated Ryan with a deference that felt strange and uncomfortable. Marcus Thompson, Chief Investment Officer, who'd worked with Eleanor for 23 years and managed the fund that decided which properties to acquire. Jennifer Zhao, Chief Financial Officer, who'd been Eleanor's roommate at Harvard Business School before joining ER Cross Holdings at its inception. David O'Brien, Chief Legal Counsel, who handled the complex international regulations governing property ownership across 6 continents. Patricia Washington, Chief Operating Officer, who managed the day-to-day operations of 372 properties and the thousands of employees who maintained them. And finally, Raymond Kim, Chief Technology Officer, who'd built the proprietary software systems that tracked everything from lease agreements to maintenance schedules to market trends. They gathered in the living room, but the space felt wrong for such a significant meeting, too domestic, too ordinary. Ryan offered coffee, which everyone accepted politely, and then Mr. Pemberton began the formal will reading. The language was dense and legal, but the substance was clear. Eleanor Ruth Cross Mitchell left her entire estate, including 100% ownership of ER Cross Holdings and all subsidiary companies, to her son, Ryan Thomas Mitchell, to be managed as he saw fit with the guidance and support of the existing executive team. "Your mother left very specific instructions," Mr. Pemberton explained, after finishing the formal document. "She wanted you to have complete control, but she also wanted you to have time to learn the business before making major decisions. The executive team has authority to continue current operations for 6 months, during which time you'll receive intensive education about real estate investment, property management, and the specific assets in the portfolio." 6 months, Ryan repeated, trying to wrap his mind around learning an entire industry in half a year. Jennifer Zhao leaned forward, her expression kind but direct. "Your mother talked about you constantly, Ryan. She was so proud of your work in libraries, your dedication to education and literacy. She believed those values, helping people access knowledge, creating opportunities for learning, should inform how we manage this company going forward." She paused. "She also believed you had more natural business instinct than you realized, but that you'd chosen a different path because it aligned with your principles. She respected that deeply." Ryan felt emotion rising in his throat, but he forced it down. "I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I'm qualified to run a $90 billion company. I've never taken a business class. I don't know anything about commercial real estate or international property management or—" "Your mother didn't either at first," Marcus Thompson interrupted gently. "She inherited $2 million from your grandfather and turned it into this through 40 years of calculated risks, constant learning, and surrounding herself with people smarter than her in specific areas. She wasn't a genius. She was persistent, strategic, and willing to admit what she didn't know. Those qualities matter more than an MBA. Also," David O'Brien added with a slight smile, "you're not running the company day to day. We are. You're the owner and ultimate decision maker, which means you set vision and values and strategic direction, but you're not processing lease agreements or negotiating with contractors or managing property repairs. Your role is bigger picture." The concept helped, but Ryan still felt overwhelmed. "What happens immediately? What do I need to do today, this week?" Mr. Pemberton produced a tablet and began outlining steps. Meetings with financial advisors, transfers of accounts and assets, legal filings to officially transfer ownership, security arrangements because apparently billionaires needed security, media strategy because apparently his wealth would eventually become public knowledge, and tax planning because apparently $90 billion came with extremely complex tax implications. The list was exhausting just hearing it, but Ryan nodded, trying to absorb information that felt like it was coming too fast. Then Patricia Washington said something that snapped his attention back. "We'll also need to address the situation with your wife and Derek Morrison." The room went quiet, but everyone was looking at Ryan with expressions that suggested they all knew. Of course they knew. His mother had known, had hired investigators, had documented everything. These people were trusted advisors who would have been briefed on personal situations that might affect the business transition. "I'm handling that personally," Ryan said quietly, his voice carrying a firmness that surprised him. Patricia nodded but continued carefully. "I ask because Crown Tower and the Nexus Tech Complex are significant assets, and both Derek Morrison and Victoria Mitchell have connections to those properties. If you're planning to make changes that might affect operations or tenants, we need to coordinate to ensure we're not creating legal exposure or operational disruptions." Ryan appreciated the professionalism, but also recognized the implicit question. Are you going to use your power to destroy them? And if so, how can we minimize business risk while you do? I'm not making any property decisions based on personal relationships, Ryan said, which was technically true. If changes happen, they'll be for legitimate business reasons. That was less true, but it bought him time to think. The meeting continued for 3 hours, covering everything from immediate financial transfers to long-term strategic planning to the schedule for Ryan's intensive business education. By the time the executive team left, Ryan's head was spinning with information. But one thing was crystal clear. His life had changed irrevocably, and there was no going back to the comfortable ignorance of yesterday. That afternoon, Victoria called. "Hey, can we talk? I'm coming by the house around 6. Her tone was carefully casual, but Ryan heard the tension underneath. This was it, the divorce conversation, timed to occur after the funeral was decently passed, before any inheritance had been formally processed, when she still believed there was nothing to inherit anyway. "Sure," Ryan said, keeping his voice neutral. "I'll be here." He spent the intervening hours reading through more of his mother's records, but also reflecting on his marriage. When had it actually died? Was there a specific moment, or had it been a slow deterioration they'd both ignored? Victoria had never been effusive with affection, but Ryan had interpreted that as independence rather than indifference. She'd been ambitious, driven, focused on career advancement, but Ryan had supported that, had taken on more household responsibilities to free her time for work. He'd thought they were a team with different roles, but apparently she'd thought they were mismatched people stuck together by inertia and early poor judgment. Victoria arrived at exactly 6 p.m., but she wasn't alone. Derek was with her, and seeing them together in his, technically his mother's, technically now his, house, felt like a violation. They stood in the entryway, Victoria holding a folder that Ryan knew contained divorce papers before she even spoke. "Ryan, we need to talk about our marriage," Victoria began, her voice taking on the patient, slightly condescending tone she used when explaining tech concepts to her less sophisticated colleagues. "I think we both know things haven't been working for a while." Derek stood slightly behind her, his hand on her back in that possessive gesture Ryan had noticed at the funeral. But now Derek's expression carried something that looked like pity mixed with superiority, the look of a man who'd won without even trying. Ryan said nothing, just waited, curious to see how they'd frame this. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Victoria continued, "about what I want from life, about my career trajectory, about the kind of partnership I need to achieve my goals. And I think I know that you and I want different things. You're a wonderful person, kind and thoughtful, but you're also—" She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound as cruel as her true feelings. "You're comfortable with a smaller life, the library work, the quiet evenings, the modest lifestyle. That's not wrong, but it's not what I need anymore." "What do you need?" Ryan asked quietly, genuinely curious how she'd articulate it. "Ambition, drive, someone who understands the corporate world and social expectations that come with success. Someone who's building something significant rather than maintaining something small." She glanced at Derek, who squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. "Derek understands that world. We've become close over the past year, and I've realized that what we have, what Derek and I have, is the partnership I need." "How long?" Ryan asked, though he knew the answer from the investigator's report. Victoria had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Does it matter? The point is that staying married would be unfair to both of us. You deserve someone who appreciates your choices, and I deserve someone who shares my ambitions." Derek finally spoke, his tone carrying false sympathy that made Ryan's hands clench. "Ryan, man, this is hard for everyone, but Victoria and we didn't plan this. It just happened. Sometimes people connect in ways that are undeniable, and fighting it would be dishonest to everyone involved." 18 months, Ryan said flatly, watching Derek's expression shift to surprise. You've been sleeping together for 18 months. You didn't plan it, but you've been actively pursuing it for over a year while living in my house, eating food I bought, accepting my support while my mother was dying." Victoria's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. "You had me followed?" "My mother did," Ryan replied, the truth feeling powerful in his mouth. "She noticed things I was too trusting to see. She documented everything before she died. So let's skip the 'it just happened' narrative and be honest. You decided I wasn't successful enough for your reimagined life. Derek offered an upgrade, and you've been planning this divorce for months." The silence stretched taut, but then Derek laughed. Actually laughed, the sound sharp and cruel and eerily similar to his laugh at the funeral. "Okay, fine. Yes, Victoria and I are together. Yes, we've been planning to end your marriage so we can start ours. You want brutal honesty? Here it is. You're a nice guy, Ryan, but you're also boring. You're stuck in a dead-end career helping people check out books while the world passes. You buy. Victoria needs someone who's going places, and I'm making partner at one of the city's top law firms. We're in the same league. You're playing a different game entirely." Ryan felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "And the inheritance? Is that a factor in your timing?" Victoria had the decency to look uncomfortable, but she lifted her chin defensively. "Your mother was a librarian who died of cancer after expensive treatment. There's probably nothing left but this house and maybe some debt. I'm not entitled to much in terms of community property, and honestly, I don't want it. I want a clean break. Sign the papers, we'll sell the house and split proceeds, and we both move on." "Victoria's being generous," Derek added, his tone suggesting Ryan should be grateful. "She could drag this out, fight for more, but she just wants it over quickly. We both do. So sign the papers tonight and we can file tomorrow. Quick, clean, minimal drama." Ryan looked at the divorce papers Victoria was holding, then at the two people who'd betrayed him with such casual cruelty. His mother's letter echoed in his mind. "True power is about choosing your response to those who wrong you." "No," Ryan said simply. Victoria blinked. "No. I'm not signing tonight. You want a divorce? Fine. File your papers, start the legal process. But I'm not making it quick or convenient for you. You've been lying to me for 18 months. You can wait a few weeks for your freedom." Derek's expression darkened. "Don't be petty, Ryan. This is happening whether you cooperate or not." "Then it happens without my cooperation," Ryan replied evenly. "File your papers, Victoria, but do it properly through attorneys, through the system. I'm not giving you the satisfaction of a same-day signature that lets you pretend this was mutual or amicable." Victoria's face twisted with frustration, but she tucked the folder under her arm. "Fine. You want to be difficult? My attorney will file tomorrow. Hope you enjoy what little you inherited, because when this is over, you'll be alone in an empty house with nothing but your books and your dead mother's memory." They left together, but Derek paused at the door, turning back with a smirk. "For what it's worth, Ryan, you should probably start looking for a new place. This house is worth maybe $400,000 in this market. After splitting proceeds and paying off your mom's medical debts, you'll have enough for a one-bedroom apartment somewhere cheaper. Might be time to grow up and face reality." Ryan closed the door on Derek's laughter and Victoria's retreating footsteps, but he didn't feel angry or hurt. He felt clear, purposeful, ready. Tomorrow, Victoria would file for divorce. Tomorrow, Derek would go to work believing he'd won. Tomorrow, they'd both continue living their lives in buildings Ryan owned, working in offices Ryan controlled, secure in their assumptions about his powerlessness. But tomorrow was also when Ryan would officially take control of ER Cross Holdings, when accounts would transfer and ownership would formalize, when the modest librarian's son would become one of the wealthiest people on earth. And what happened after that? That depended entirely on what kind of person Ryan chose to be. The 6 months that followed Victoria's divorce filing were among the strangest of Ryan's life, but they transformed him in ways that went far beyond wealth. The divorce proceeded through legal channels, with Victoria's attorney filing paperwork that claimed irreconcilable differences and requested an equitable distribution of marital assets. Because Ryan had inherited nothing during their marriage, the inheritance came after Eleanor's death, but before the divorce was finalized, Victoria's claims were limited to the house and whatever modest savings Ryan had accumulated during their 6 years together. Her attorney estimated Ryan's total net worth at approximately $380,000, mostly in home equity, and requested half. Ryan's attorney, provided by Mr. Pemberton and specializing in high net worth divorces, filed responsive paperwork that neither confirmed nor denied those figures. The strategy was simple. Let Victoria and Derek continue believing Ryan was inheriting nothing significant, while the divorce proceeded normally, then reveal the truth at the most strategically advantageous moment. Meanwhile, Ryan began his intensive education in commercial real estate, international property management, and the specific operations of Cross Holdings. The executive team designed a curriculum that was part MBA, part real-world apprenticeship, and part strategic thinking workshop. Marcus Thompson taught him investment fundamentals, but with a focus on long-term value creation rather than quick profits. Your mother never flipped properties, Marcus explained during one of their weekly sessions. She bought for decades-long holds, weathering market cycles because she understood that prime real estate in major cities only increases in value over time if properly maintained and managed. The properties in our portfolio have appreciated an average of 312% since acquisition, but some we've held for 40 years. Jennifer Zhao walked him through financial statements that would have intimidated Ryan 6 months ago, but now made sense. Cash flow from properties is stable, predictable income, she explained, pointing to spreadsheets showing monthly revenue from thousands of leases. The portfolio generates $3.7 billion in annual net income after expenses, taxes, and reserves. That money either gets reinvested in new acquisitions or distributed to you as the owner. Your mother took minimal distributions, maybe $10 million annually, because she preferred compounding the wealth for your eventual inheritance. David O'Brien introduced Ryan to the complex international legal frameworks that governed property ownership across different jurisdictions, but also the ethical considerations that should inform those decisions. Your mother refused to invest in any country with poor human rights records, regardless of potential returns, David said with obvious respect. She believed wealth came with responsibility, and that responsibility included not supporting oppressive regimes through economic investment. It cost her opportunities, but it let her sleep at night. Patricia Washington showed Ryan the operational side, how properties were maintained, how tenants were managed, how problems were solved. She took him to buildings across the portfolio, introduced him to property managers and maintenance teams, showed him everything from HVAC systems to lease negotiation strategies. Your mother knew every significant building personally, Patricia said, during a tour of a Boston office complex. She'd visit quarterly, walk the properties, talk to tenants, understand problems directly rather than through reports. The people who work in our buildings aren't abstractions. They're real people whose lives are affected by our decisions. Raymond Kim taught Ryan about the technology systems that made managing a global empire possible, but also about data security, privacy concerns, and the digital vulnerabilities that came with concentrated wealth. You're now a target, Raymond said bluntly during a cybersecurity briefing. People will try to hack your accounts, steal your identity, impersonate you to access assets. We've built robust protections, but you need to be vigilant always. Beyond the formal education, Ryan continued his library work, refusing to quit despite the executive team's surprise. "This is who I am," Ryan explained to Mr. Pemberton when the lawyer questioned the decision. "My mother worked at the library while running this company. If she could balance both, so can I. And honestly, the library work keeps me grounded, reminds me why wealth matters, because most people don't have it and struggle daily with problems money could solve." The divorce proceedings moved slowly through the system, with Victoria growing increasingly frustrated at Ryan's refusal to simply settle and be done. She'd moved in with Derek officially, living in his Crown Tower penthouse, and her social media showed a life of luxury: expensive restaurants, weekend trips to New York, charity galas where Boston's elite gathered to see and be seen. Ryan watched from a distance, learning about the world Victoria and Derek inhabited, a world of social climbing, performative philanthropy, relationships built on utility rather than affection. It was exhausting just observing it, and Ryan found himself grateful his mother had raised him outside that sphere. But Ryan also began making plans, strategic decisions about how to handle the inevitable revelation, because Victoria would eventually discover the truth, either through the divorce proceedings when asset disclosure became mandatory, or through public records as Cross Holdings' ownership change was filed with various regulatory agencies. The question wasn't if she'd find out, but when and how Ryan wanted to control that narrative. "I want to meet with Crown Tower's management," Ryan told Patricia during one of their weekly strategy sessions, 6 months after his mother's death. "Not as the owner, just as an interested party touring the building. Can you arrange that?" Patricia's expression suggested she knew exactly what Ryan was planning, but she simply nodded. "I'll set it up for next week. What about Nexus Tech headquarters?" "Same thing. Anonymous tour, neutral context. I want to see these places through their eyes before they know who I am." The Crown Tower tour happened on a Tuesday afternoon, but Ryan dressed carefully in his usual librarian clothes, khakis, button-down shirt, casual but presentable. The property manager, a competent woman named Susan Chen, gave him the standard tour: luxury amenities, prime location, exclusive resident services, waiting list for units that often stretched years. "Our penthouse units are particularly sought after," Susan explained as they rode the elevator to the 42nd floor. "Floor-to-ceiling windows, wraparound balconies, premium finishes. We have several high-profile residents, including attorneys, tech executives, medical professionals, very successful people who appreciate the lifestyle Crown Tower provides." "What's the monthly cost for a penthouse?" Ryan asked, knowing the answer but curious how it would be presented. "They start at $12,000 monthly, but our premier units go higher depending on square footage and customizations. Our residents consider it worth the investment for the prestige and location." They didn't tour Derek's specific unit, that would have been too obvious, but Ryan saw identical layouts on other floors. The luxury was undeniable, but it also felt hollow, temporary, built on leases and monthly payments that could evaporate if circumstances changed. "We have a waiting list of over 200 people for these units," Susan said with obvious pride. "Many wait years for the opportunity to live here." Ryan thought about the power dynamics inherent in that statement. Susan had no idea she was giving a tour to the person who owned the building, who could change policies, raise rents, or evict tenants for lease violations. That information asymmetry represented power in its purest form: knowledge others lacked, leverage others couldn't match. "What happens if a tenant violates their lease?" Ryan asked, curious about the practical mechanics. "We have very strict lease terms," Susan replied. "Violations result in warnings, and repeated violations can lead to eviction proceedings. But that's rare among our residents. They understand the privilege of living here and typically comply with all terms. What about subletting or unauthorized occupants? Absolutely prohibited, Susan said firmly. Leases are specific about who can occupy units. Unauthorized occupants are grounds for immediate lease termination. We conduct periodic inspections to ensure compliance. Ryan filed that information away, thinking about Victoria living in Derek's penthouse. Was she listed on his lease as an authorized occupant? Or was she there informally, in violation of terms Derek had agreed to when he signed his rental contract? The Nexus Tech headquarters tour happened Friday, but this time Ryan posed as a potential commercial tenant, evaluating office space. The leasing agent, an energetic man named Tom Bradford, showed him available floors, explained lease terms, touted the building's amenities and prime downtown location. "We're home to some of Boston's most innovative companies," Tom said proudly, pointing to the directory showing various tech firms, including Victoria's employer. "Nexus Tech Solutions is our anchor tenant, occupying 5 floors. Great company culture, talented people, exactly the kind of tenant we want to attract." "Do you know if they're expanding?" Ryan asked casually. "I've heard they're growing quickly." "They are, but they're also locked into a long-term lease that restricts expansion within this building. They'd need to negotiate new terms with ownership, which can be complicated with buildings managed by larger real estate firms." Ryan nodded, absorbing the information. Victoria's company was constrained by lease terms, which meant her ability to advance professionally was partly dependent on her employer's physical space options, and those options were controlled by the owner of the building, which was now Ryan. "What's your relationship with the ownership company?" Ryan asked, curious about how much the leasing agent knew. "ER Cross Holdings owns the building, but they're very hands-off with day-to-day operations. They set strategic direction and approve major decisions, but property management handles the direct tenant relationships. It's a good system, professional distance, but reliable ownership." Professional distance. Ryan liked that phrase. It suggested he could make decisions affecting Derek and Victoria without them ever knowing he was behind those decisions, at least not immediately. By the end of 6 months, Ryan felt comfortable with the basics of his inheritance, but more importantly, he'd decided what kind of owner he wanted to be. Not vengeful, but not naive either. Not cruel, but not passive. He would make decisions that were strategically sound and ethically defensible, and if those decisions happened to complicate life for people who'd betrayed him, that was consequence rather than revenge. "I want to call a board meeting," Ryan told the executive team during their monthly check-in. "I have some policy changes I'd like to implement across the portfolio." The 5 executives looked at each other, but Jennifer Zhao spoke for the group. "You're the owner, Ryan. What you want, we'll make happen. What changes are you considering?" Ryan outlined his ideas. Stricter enforcement of lease terms across all residential properties, mandatory lease compliance reviews, enhanced tenant screening procedures, and a new initiative to ensure all properties were being used consistently with lease agreements. None of it was unusual or unreasonable. In fact, it was standard practice in well-managed real estate portfolios. But the timing and specific buildings where it would be enforced first would be very deliberate. "I also want to review the Nexus Tech lease," Ryan added. "Not to terminate it, but to understand expansion options and whether our lease terms are preventing them from growing in ways that might benefit both parties." Marcus Thompson smiled slightly, understanding the subtext. "Crown Tower and the Nexus Complex. You want to start compliance reviews there first." "I want to start everywhere eventually," Ryan corrected, which was true. "But yes, those seem like good places to begin. High-value properties, established tenant bases, good test cases for new policies." "And if the reviews discover violations?" David O'Brien asked, his legal mind already considering implications. Then we enforce lease terms consistently and fairly, Ryan replied. Same as we would for any tenant in any property. No special treatment, but no targeting either. Just honest enforcement of agreements people signed voluntarily. The executive team agreed to implement Ryan's policies, but Patricia pulled him aside afterward. You know this will eventually expose Derek's situation with Victoria, living in his unit without being on the lease. If he's violating his lease, Ryan replied evenly, then that's his responsibility to address. We're not targeting him specifically, we're implementing portfolio-wide compliance reviews that happen to include Crown Tower. If he's in compliance, there's no problem. If he's not, he has options to come into compliance or face consequences like any other tenant. Patricia studied him carefully. Your mother would be proud of how you're handling this. Firm but fair, strategic but ethical. Ryan hoped that was true, but he also knew the real test was coming because the divorce trial was scheduled for next month. Victoria's discovery requests were becoming more aggressive, and eventually, the truth about his inheritance would emerge. When it did, Victoria and Derek would realize they'd underestimated him catastrophically, and their response would reveal whether they were capable of humility or would double down on the contempt they'd shown from the beginning. The divorce trial began on a cold Tuesday in March, 11 months after Eleanor Mitchell's death, but the real drama started before they even entered the courtroom. Victoria's attorney, a sharp woman named Margaret Reeves from Derek's firm, had filed aggressive discovery motions demanding full disclosure of Ryan's assets, income, and inheritance. Ryan's attorney, Lawrence Chen, had responded with meticulous documentation showing exactly what Ryan had inherited. Complete ownership of ER Cross Holdings, valued at $93 billion as of the most recent appraisal. Margaret Reeves's office called Lawrence Chen at 4:47 p.m. the day before trial, but Ryan was present for the call, which Lawrence put on speaker. This documentation can't be accurate, Margaret said, her voice tight with disbelief. You're claiming Ryan Mitchell inherited $93 billion from his mother, a librarian. I'm not claiming anything, Lawrence replied calmly. I'm providing factual documentation of assets inherited. Eleanor Mitchell, also known professionally as ER Cross, was the founder and sole owner of ER Cross Holdings, one of the world's largest private real estate investment companies. Ryan inherited the entirety of that estate upon her death. All documentation has been verified by independent appraisers and is available for your review. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Ryan thought the call had dropped. But then Margaret spoke again, her tone sharp. We'll need to continue the trial. This changes everything about asset division, community property claims, and nothing has changed, Lawrence interrupted firmly. Ryan inherited these assets after Mrs. Mitchell's death, but before divorce filing. Massachusetts law is clear that inheritances received during marriage, but not commingled with marital assets, remain separate property. Your client has no claim to any portion of the ER Cross Holdings estate. We'll argue that Ryan concealed assets during discovery, that he manipulated timing of, my client concealed nothing. He responded to every discovery request accurately and completely. If your client assumed the inheritance was minimal without conducting proper due diligence, that's not my client's problem. Ryan heard voices in the background of Margaret's call, urgent, angry voices, and then Derek's unmistakable tone. Put me on the phone. Mr. Morrison, Lawrence said before Derek could speak, you're not a party to this divorce. Your participation in this call is inappropriate. Ryan, Derek's voice carried disbelief mixed with something that might have been panic. This is a joke, right? Some kind of negotiation tactic? Your mother was a librarian, for Christ's sake. Where would she get $90 billion? Ryan took control of the call, his voice quiet but firm. My mother built a real estate empire over 40 years, Derek. She chose to live modestly to give me a normal childhood, but she was extraordinarily successful in ways neither you nor Victoria bothered to investigate before deciding I wasn't worth your respect. Crown Tower, Derek said suddenly, his tone shifting to horror. Wait, Crown Tower, the building, you own it? I own the company that owns it, yes, along with 371 other properties globally, including the Nexus Tech headquarters building where Victoria works. Victoria's voice joined the call, shrill with anger. You lied to us. You let us file for divorce thinking you had nothing. I never lied, Ryan replied calmly. You assumed I'd inherited nothing without asking. You filed for divorce because you decided I wasn't successful enough for your ambitions. The size of my inheritance doesn't change the reasons you wanted to end our marriage. It just reveals that your judgment of my worth was spectacularly wrong. This is manipulation, Victoria shouted. You manipulated us into filing so you could, what, humiliate us? Prove some kind of point? I did nothing except let you proceed with your stated wishes, Ryan said. You wanted a divorce. You got one. That my financial situation is different than you assumed doesn't change the fundamental reality that you stopped loving me, if you ever did, long before you knew anything about inheritance. Lawrence Chen took control of the call again. The trial proceeds tomorrow as scheduled. Your client can attempt to argue for claims on the inheritance, but I assure you Massachusetts case law is not on your side. I suggest you counsel your client to accept the settlement terms we proposed. Clean split of premarital assets, no ongoing support obligations, and a quick dissolution. Fighting this will be expensive and unsuccessful. Margaret ended the call without responding, but Ryan could imagine the chaos in her office. Victoria demanding options, Derek calculating financial exposure, both of them realizing they'd destroyed their relationship with Ryan based on assumptions that were catastrophically wrong. That night, Ryan couldn't sleep, but not from anxiety. He felt clear, purposeful, ready for whatever the trial would bring. His phone buzzed constantly with messages, Victoria calling repeatedly, Derek texting apologies that felt opportunistic rather than genuine, even Victoria's parents reaching out with careful inquiries that barely masked their horror at their daughter's mistake. Ryan ignored them all, but he did call Mr. Pemberton. Tomorrow's going to be difficult, Ryan said. Victoria and Derek know now. They'll try everything to claim some portion of the estate. Let them try, Mr. Pemberton replied confidently. The law is clear and your mother was meticulous about documentation. They'll lose, Ryan. The only question is whether they lose gracefully or messily. The trial began at 9 a.m. in Suffolk County Family Court, but the atmosphere was charged in ways typical divorce proceedings rarely achieved. Victoria sat at the plaintiff's table looking devastated, but also calculating like she was already working through strategies to salvage something from this disaster. Derek sat behind her in the gallery, his expensive suit doing nothing to hide his obvious distress. Judge Maria Santos presided, a no-nonsense jurist in her 60s who'd handled thousands of divorce cases and had a reputation for fairness but impatience with manipulation. She reviewed the case file carefully before speaking. This is a dissolution of marriage between Victoria Ann Mitchell and Ryan Thomas Mitchell, married 6 years ago in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Mrs. Mitchell filed for divorce citing irreconcilable differences and seeking equitable distribution of marital assets. However, there appears to be significant dispute about the value of assets involved. She looked at Margaret Reeves. Counselor, you filed a motion yesterday for continuance and to compel additional discovery. Explain. Margaret stood, her professional composure barely intact. Your Honor, we recently discovered that Mr. Mitchell inherited a substantial estate, allegedly worth over $90 billion, from his mother who passed away 13 months ago. We believe this inheritance should be considered in asset division, and we need additional time to conduct proper valuation and forensic accounting. Judge Santos turned to Lawrence Chen. Counselor. Lawrence stood smoothly, his confidence absolute. Your Honor, Massachusetts law is unambiguous. Inheritances received during marriage remain separate property unless commingled with marital assets. Mr. Mitchell inherited E.R. Cross Holdings after his mother's death, which occurred before divorce filing but during the marriage. He has not commingled these inherited assets with marital funds. They are held entirely separate, managed by a professional executive team, and remain under his sole control. Mrs. Mitchell has no legal claim to any portion of the inheritance, regardless of its size. The timing is suspicious, Margaret argued. Mrs. Mitchell filed for divorce unaware of this inheritance. Had she known, she might have reconsidered. That's exactly the point, Lawrence interrupted. Mrs. Mitchell filed for divorce believing Mr. Mitchell had inherited minimal assets. Her decision to end the marriage was made without consideration of his financial position, which demonstrates that her desire for divorce was based on personal rather than financial factors. She cannot now claim she deserves a portion of wealth she didn't know existed when she decided to end the marriage. Judge Santos looked at Victoria directly. Mrs. Mitchell, is it true you filed for divorce believing your husband had inherited minimal assets from his mother? Victoria stood, her voice shaking but audible. Yes, Your Honor, but that's because he never told me. Did you ask him about the inheritance before filing? No, but I assumed. You assumed, Judge Santos repeated flatly. Did your husband ever misrepresent his financial situation to you? He never told me his mother was wealthy. Was he required to tell you? Did you ask? Victoria's silence was answer enough, but Margaret tried to salvage the argument. Your Honor, the sheer scale of this inheritance, $93 billion, should factor into any equitable distribution. Even if Massachusetts law protects inherited assets, the court has discretion within legal boundaries, Judge Santos interrupted sharply, and those boundaries are clear. Inherited assets that remain separate are not subject to division in divorce proceedings. The size of the inheritance is irrelevant to its legal status. She paused, reviewing documents. Mr. Chen, your settlement proposal. Lawrence outlined the terms. The house would be sold and proceeds split equally, amounting to approximately $190,000 to each party. Ryan's premarital savings, also divided, would add another $35,000 to each side. No alimony, no ongoing support obligations. Clean break. Total value to Victoria, $225,000. That's nothing, Victoria exclaimed before Margaret could stop her. He inherited $93 billion and you're offering me $225,000. Judge Santos's expression hardened. Mrs. Mitchell, you filed for divorce. You initiated these proceedings. You decided your marriage was over. The law protects your husband's inheritance because it is his separate property, earned by his mother through decades of work before you even met him. What exactly do you think you're entitled to? I was his wife for 6 years. And during those 6 years, what did you contribute to his mother's business? What role did you play in building the fortune she left him? Judge Santos waited, but Victoria had no answer. Exactly. You're entitled to half of the marital assets accumulated during your marriage, which Mr. Mitchell is offering you. That's the law, Mrs. Mitchell. I understand you're disappointed. Disappointed? Victoria's voice rose hysterically. I'm being denied billions of dollars because of technicalities. No, Judge Santos corrected firmly. You're being denied billions of dollars because they're not yours and never were. This court will not reward you for filing for divorce. by granting you claims on assets. You have no legal right to simply because you regret your decision after learning their value. Margaret tried to redirect. Your Honor, we'd like to request mediation to explore creative settlement, options that might... No, Ryan said, speaking for the first time in court. Everyone turned to look at him, but he stood calmly, addressing the judge directly. Your Honor, I'm not interested in mediation or creative settlements. I'm offering what the law requires and what fairness demands. Half of the assets we built together during our marriage. That's $225,000. Victoria can accept that and move forward with her life. Or she can reject it and we can litigate every detail until we reach the exact same conclusion after spending thousands on attorneys. Her choice. Judge Santos looked at Victoria. Mrs. Mitchell, I strongly advise you to accept this settlement. If you proceed to trial, you will lose, and you'll have spent considerable money for the privilege of losing. Take the settlement, end your marriage, and learn from this experience. But Victoria's face had transformed from devastated to furious, and when Derek stood in the gallery, his expression mirrored hers. This is absurd, Derek announced loudly. Ryan's using technicalities to deny Victoria what any decent person would share with their former spouse. The ethical thing, the right thing, would be to give her at least $1 billion. What's $1 billion to someone with $93 billion? The courtroom went silent, but Judge Santos's expression shifted to outright anger. Mr. Morrison, you are not a party to this proceeding. You will sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. I'm Victoria's fiancé, Derek said defiantly. I have a right to... You have a right to nothing in these proceedings, Judge Santos snapped. And frankly, your presence here is inappropriate. This is a divorce between two married people, and the fact that you're engaged to one of them while their marriage is still legally valid tells me everything I need to know about the ethics involved. She turned to Victoria. Mrs. Mitchell, last chance. Accept the settlement or proceed to trial, but understand that if you choose trial, you will pay your own attorney's fees regardless of outcome. What's your decision? Margaret whispered urgently to Victoria, but Victoria shook her head stubbornly, her voice brittle. I want what I'm entitled to. If that means trial, fine. We'll prove that Ryan manipulated timing, concealed assets, and behaved unethically throughout this process. Lawrence Chen looked at Ryan, who nodded slightly, accepting Victoria's choice. Then we'll see you at trial, Your Honor. Judge Santos set the trial date for 6 weeks later, but as the courtroom emptied, Derek approached Ryan in the hallway, his expression a mixture of anger and desperation. Ryan, come on, be reasonable. Victoria made a mistake, but you don't have to destroy her over it. Give her something substantial. Show some generosity. Ryan studied Derek, his former best friend, the man who'd betrayed him, who'd laughed at his inheritance, who'd called him a pathetic mama's boy while coveting his wife and mocking his mother's death. You want me to be generous? To show mercy to people who showed me none? Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Because you have more money than you could spend in 1,000 lifetimes. Because you convinced Victoria to leave me thinking I was worthless. But now you realize I'm extraordinarily wealthy and you want access to that wealth through her. Ryan finished coldly. This was never about love, Derek. You pursued Victoria because she was attractive and successful and made you look good. She left me because I wasn't successful enough for her ambitions. Now those calculations have reversed and you're both panicking. That's not true, Derek insisted, but his tone lacked conviction. Crown Tower, Ryan said quietly, changing subjects. Unit 4207. That's your penthouse, correct? Derek's expression shifted to wariness. Yes, why? Just curious, how's the view from the 42nd floor? Must be spectacular, especially at sunrise over the harbor." "It's fine," Derek said suspiciously. "What does that have to do with—" "Nothing," Ryan replied. "Just making conversation about property I happen to own." He walked away, leaving Derek standing in the courthouse hallway, with an expression that suggested he'd finally understood exactly how much power Ryan now held over his life. The 6 weeks between the first hearing and the scheduled trial were chaotic, but Ryan maintained focus on being fair rather than vengeful, strategic rather than reactive. The portfolio-wide compliance review that Ryan had initiated months earlier reached Crown Tower, and the results were precisely what Ryan had anticipated. Derek's lease explicitly prohibited unauthorized occupants, but Victoria had been living in the unit full-time for over 8 months, without being added to the lease agreement. This wasn't unusual. Many tenants violated subletting or occupancy clauses, but Crown Tower had always enforced these terms strictly for all residents. Susan Chen, the property manager, called Derek personally to address the violation, but she did so professionally and consistently with how similar situations were handled throughout the building. Derek had 3 options: add Victoria to the lease through proper application and approval process, which required background checks and reference verification, have Victoria move out immediately, or face lease termination proceedings. Derek chose to add Victoria to the lease, but the application process revealed interesting details. Victoria's credit history showed some concerning patterns: high debt ratios, multiple credit card accounts near their limits, a history of late payments. Nothing disqualifying on its own, but combined with the lease violation and the fact that Derek was already stretching financially to afford the $12,000 monthly rent, the building's ownership had reasonable grounds to question whether adding another occupant without additional income contribution made financial sense. Ryan deliberately stayed removed from the decision-making process, but he ensured Susan had clear authority to enforce policies consistently regardless of tenant identity. When Susan recommended approving Victoria's addition to the lease conditional on a rent increase to $14,500 monthly, standard for 2-occupant penthouses, Ryan's only instruction was, treat this exactly as you'd treat any other tenant in similar circumstances. Derek argued, threatened, even had Margaret Reeves send a letter suggesting the rent increase was retaliation for the divorce proceedings. Lawrence Chen responded with documentation showing identical rent increases for every other 2-occupant penthouse in Crown Tower, demonstrating consistent application of policy rather than targeted action. Derek paid the increased rent, but the financial strain was obvious, and Victoria's social media posts about luxury lifestyle suddenly stopped appearing with previous frequency. Meanwhile, at the Nexus Tech headquarters, Patricia Washington initiated lease renewal discussions with Victoria's employer. The current lease was expiring in 8 months, and Nexus Tech wanted to expand their footprint in the building, but the terms they'd negotiated 5 years earlier were below current market rates for prime downtown office space. Patricia presented Nexus Tech's management with 2 options: renew at market rates, a 35% increase from current rent, or relocate to comparable space elsewhere in the city, which would cost similar amounts plus moving expenses and business disruption. From a business perspective, renewal made sense, but it required Nexus Tech to significantly increase their real estate budget. The company's CFO, reviewing options, decided to implement cost-cutting measures elsewhere to afford the lease renewal, and one of those measures was restructuring middle management. Victoria's position, senior product manager with substantial salary and benefits, was identified as potentially redundant with other roles, and she was offered a choice: accept a lateral move to a different team with reduced compensation, or take a severance package and seek opportunities elsewhere. Victoria chose the severance, but Ryan knew from reports that her job search was struggling. The tech sector was competitive, her salary expectations were high, and references from Nexus Tech were professionally neutral rather than enthusiastically positive, likely reflecting some performance issues that predated the lease situation but were exacerbated by her distraction during the divorce. Ryan felt no satisfaction watching Derek and Victoria's circumstances deteriorate, but he felt no guilt either. These weren't targeted attacks. They were natural consequences of business decisions made by professional managers following standard practices. Derek had violated his lease terms. Nexus Tech had decided restructuring made financial sense, given market rate rent increases. Victoria's job performance had been adequate but not exceptional, making her position vulnerable during cost-cutting. What Ryan did feel was clarity about the difference between revenge and accountability. Revenge would have been evicting Derek immediately, firing Victoria personally, using his wealth as a weapon to destroy them. Accountability was allowing normal business processes to proceed without interference or protection, letting Derek and Victoria experience the same market forces everyone else navigated without special treatment. The divorce trial date approached, but Margaret Reeves called Lawrence Chen 3 days before with a settlement request. Victoria was willing to accept the original offer, $225,000 from House Sale and Savings Division, no alimony, clean break, if Ryan would agree to one additional term, a non-disclosure agreement preventing Ryan from discussing Victoria's affair or the circumstances of their divorce publicly. Lawrence presented the request to Ryan, but his opinion was clear. You have no obligation to agree to this. Victoria filed for divorce publicly. Her relationship with Derek Morrison is a matter of public record through court filings, and you have every right to discuss your own life experiences. Ryan thought about his mother's letter, about choosing responses deliberately rather than reactively, about the kind of person he wanted to be with extraordinary wealth. Tell Margaret I'll agree to the NDA on one condition. It's mutual. Victoria can't discuss me, my inheritance, or our marriage publicly either. I don't want her doing tell-all interviews or writing books about the billionaire I divorced or whatever. Both of us move forward privately, or neither of us has protection. Margaret agreed immediately, suggesting Victoria was more concerned about protecting her own reputation than exposing Ryan's. The settlement was finalized 3 days before trial, dissolving the marriage and dividing assets exactly as originally proposed. Victoria received $225,000 from a marriage to one of the wealthiest people on earth. The divorce was final, but Ryan's education in power and consequence was just beginning. Ryan stood in the newly renovated children's section of the Westfield Public Library, watching kids excitedly explore the interactive learning spaces his foundation had funded, but the real satisfaction came from seeing his mother's name on the dedication plaque. 3 years after inheriting ER Cross Holdings, Ryan had transformed both the company and himself, but the core values his mother instilled remained unchanged. He'd continued working at the library part-time, using his position to identify needs and opportunities that wealth could address. The Westfield renovation was just one of 73 library projects his foundation had funded across Massachusetts, but it was the most personal. The ER Cross Foundation focused on 3 areas: literacy and education, affordable housing, and opportunities for people who'd been overlooked by traditional systems. Ryan had endowed scholarships for first-generation college students, funded workforce development programs in underserved communities, and acquired properties specifically to convert them into affordable housing that wouldn't be displaced by gentrification. The company itself had grown to 412 properties, worth approximately $108 billion, But Ryan had implemented policies his mother would have approved of: fair wages for all employees, environmental sustainability standards, tenant protections, and community investment requirements for every acquisition. Profits were strong, but profit wasn't the only metric that mattered. Derek and Victoria had married 18 months after the divorce was finalized, but their relationship struggled under financial pressures and the reality that neither was quite as successful as they'd imagined. Derek made partner at his firm, but discovered the title came with expectations that strained his abilities. Victoria found work at a smaller tech company, but never regained the salary and status she'd had at Nexus Tech. Ryan heard updates occasionally through mutual acquaintances, but he felt no satisfaction in their struggles and no desire for reconciliation. They'd made choices, he'd made different choices. Everyone lived with consequences. His anger had faded to indifference, which felt healthier than sustained rage or vindictive satisfaction. What Ryan did feel was gratitude for his mother's sacrifice, for the lessons learned through betrayal, for the opportunity to use wealth meaningfully. He had dated occasionally over the 3 years, but carefully, wary of people who saw his money before his character. The executive team had introduced him to Elena Rodriguez, a nonprofit director who worked in affordable housing advocacy and had no idea who Ryan was when they met at a policy conference. Their relationship developed slowly, built on shared values and genuine compatibility rather than wealth-based attraction. "Your mother would be proud," Mr. Pemberton said, joining Ryan at the library dedication. The elderly lawyer had become a trusted advisor and friend, guiding Ryan through challenges with wisdom earned across 50 years of legal practice. "You took an inheritance that could have corrupted you and used it to honor her legacy." Ryan thought about the day he'd learned the truth, the hidden office, the secret empire, the double life his mother had maintained, to give him something money couldn't buy. "I think about what she sacrificed constantly, the comfort she could have enjoyed, the recognition she deserved, the easier life she could have lived. She gave all of that up for me. And you're giving back by being exactly the person she raised you to be," Mr. Pemberton replied. "Wealthy, yes, but also kind. Powerful, but also principled. Successful by any measure, but also genuinely good. That's rarer than you might think, Ryan. Wealth reveals character rather than creating it, and your character has been revealed as exceptional." The library dedication event concluded with speeches and celebrations, but Ryan slipped away afterward to visit his mother's grave. The cemetery was quiet in the late afternoon light, and Ryan sat beside Eleanor Mitchell's headstone, simple, unpretentious, listing her only as beloved mother, dedicated librarian, and told her about the past 3 years. "I met with Derek last month," Ryan said quietly to the granite marker. "He reached out asking for advice about a legal problem, not related to me, just genuine career trouble. I helped him because it was the right thing to do, not because I owe him anything. I think you'd approve of that choice." The wind moved through trees overhead, but Ryan felt peaceful rather than melancholy. His mother's death had devastated him, but it had also freed him to become someone new, someone who understood wealth and power and responsibility in ways he couldn't have learned any other way. "Victoria actually apologized," Ryan continued, speaking to his mother as he'd done since childhood. "6 months ago, out of nowhere, she sent a letter saying she'd been in therapy and realized how badly she'd treated me. She asked for forgiveness, but she also said she didn't expect it. I wrote back telling her I forgave her years ago, that holding anger was exhausting, and that I hoped she found happiness. I meant it." The hardest lesson Ryan had learned was that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation. He could release resentment without inviting Victoria back into his life. He could acknowledge Derek's humanity without rebuilding trust. Forgiveness was about his own peace, rather than their redemption. "The company's doing well," Ryan reported, shifting to topics his mother would want to hear. "We acquired properties in 3 new countries this year, all meeting your ethical standards, all in regions with stable governments and strong human rights records. Jennifer says we're on track to hit a $120 billion valuation by year-end, but honestly, the numbers feel less important than what we're doing with them." That was the truth Ryan had discovered. Wealth was a tool, not an identity. He could use it to build, to help, to create opportunities, or he could let it isolate and corrupt him. The choice was daily, constant, requiring vigilance and values his mother had spent 33 years instilling. "I miss you," Ryan said finally, touching the cold granite. "Every day I miss you, but I understand now why you did things the way you did. You gave me something more valuable than money. You gave me character, empathy, the ability to see people as people rather than assets or obstacles. That's the real inheritance, Mom. The $93 billion was just your way of ensuring I'd have resources to match the values you taught me." Ryan stood, straightened his jacket, and walked back to his car. Not the Honda his mother had driven, but not anything ostentatious either. A comfortable sedan, practical and reliable, that reflected who he was rather than what he had. Elena waited in the passenger seat, having given him privacy with his mother, and when he slid behind the wheel, she took his hand silently. They drove back to Boston together, past Crown Tower where Derek and Victoria struggled with rent increases, past the Nexus Tech building where Victoria no longer worked, past properties Ryan owned but that felt less like possessions and more like responsibilities. The city lights reflected off the harbor as the sun set, beautiful and indifferent to the dramas unfolding within its boundaries. Ryan thought about the question his mother had posed in her letter. What kind of person will you be when you have every resource to be cruel but every reason to be wise? 3 years later, he had an answer. The same person he'd always been, but with expanded capacity to help others, to build meaningful things, to honor his mother's sacrifice by living according to her values. The money hadn't changed him, but it had revealed him, and what it revealed was someone his mother would recognize. Still kind, still principled, still genuinely caring about people beyond their utility to his goals. That person walked into boardrooms where millions of dollars were discussed, but also into libraries where children discovered the magic of books. He negotiated international property deals, but also volunteered reading to elementary school students. He was a billionaire on paper, but a librarian at heart, and somehow those two identities had merged into something his mother had always known was possible. Wealth without corruption, power without arrogance, success without losing sight of what actually mattered. Ryan Mitchell, son, librarian, and reluctant billionaire, had inherited an empire, but he'd also inherited something more valuable: the wisdom to use it well. And in a world where extreme wealth often revealed the worst of human nature, that wisdom made him not just rich, but genuinely successful in ways that transcended any balance sheet or property portfolio. His mother's legacy lived on, not in the buildings she'd acquired or the billions she'd accumulated, but in the son she'd raised to value people over profits, principle over prestige, and kindness over conquest. That was the real inheritance, and it was worth more than $90 billion could ever buy.